Well, when we speak about balance, there must be two sides, as I understand a balance. One side goes up and one side goes down. Sometimes when we start self-realization fellowship, the balance on the downside is down. But it is our effort to bring it up by counterbalancing it with the good, or the presence of God. So balance, as we speak of balance, it means that there must be two things concerned, and we are to balance them, which is true. And those two things might be answered by answering the question, what are we? What are we? Yes, we're human beings. We all know that. But we are something more than just human beings. We are spiritual beings. Spiritual beings made in the image of God. And how many people just feed, so to speak, or cater to the material side of existence, or the mundane consciousness which is within us. But we have a far greater side, a spiritual side, and we are so constituted that the balance must be kept. We must feed the material side. We must nurture that part of ourselves, but also we must feed the spiritual side of ourselves. If we do not, God sees that we do. Just remember that as we start out on this little discussion this morning about balance. Now, you wouldn't think of just taking care of your face and upper part of your body, would you, and having it look nice and clean and spotless and the rest of yourself as it shouldn't be? So with us. With the body, we must take care of all parts of it. Otherwise, disease sets in and other things. So with our existence, we must take care of both sides of our existence, the material and the physical and the spiritual side. Now look at those who do not take care of the spiritual side. Just look at them. Will you swap your condition for theirs? They are following the material things of foolish carryings on in this earthly existence, light pleasures of card playing and dancing and going to this and that, which does not give any real valuable result. They are doing those things which lead to a state of consciousness which lacks initiative and ambition. Look at them. That's all. Use your common sense and see that those people who cater to only the material side of existence do not look as they should look, being children of God. Take the businessman, the man who is interested in only one thing, business, business, business. He eats it, he dreams it, he talks it, and I think he sleeps in it sometimes. And he thinks of only that one thing. Now, being a businessman is not wrong. It is good if he would but take care of the spiritual side of himself. But he does not do that. And you look at any of these people of which I have spoken, and I can assure you, and I know you know, that very few of them have any peace at all. Very few, because it doesn't go with that kind of a combination. It goes with a balanced life between the material side of us and the presence of God within us as the spiritual side. And those people, they say, well, I haven't time for God or spiritual things. No, but they have time to eat, don't they, and breathe? Certainly they do. And what do? They forget their most important engagement, which is with God. The most important engagement they forget. And because they do, God says, all right, mister, you're coming back to me whether you like it or not. And every night in sleep, we go back to God. That's the thing, as Master has said, the greatest argument in favor of a balanced life is that we have to go back to God in sleep, whether we want to or not. We have to go back, and if we don't sleep, we die. We must go back. The soul must return to God in sleep. And because of that, through the slow process of evolution, we gradually come up a little bit after incarnations, perhaps of time, and eons of time. So, remember, that's the greatest argument for a balanced life, a balance between mundane consciousness and worldly pursuits and spiritual conquests for the presence of God. Every night in sleep we go there. Now the yogi said, well, if that's so, perhaps if we can consciously know this place of sleep in which we know we must contact God, because in the morning we wake up and we feel refreshed. We feel a great calmness just as you wake up, until mundane existence consciousness gets in and causes all the commotion. For a little bit we feel very peaceful. Because why? We have been in contact with God. The soul has been in contact with God. So the yogi said, if we can do that, perhaps we can know God better. And that's why they instituted ages ago the science of yoga, which means union of the soul with spirit. And the soul in us as ego consciousness is nothing but waking in mundane and subconsciousness. And when that ego is overcome, then we know the superconsciousness which is present in deep sleep. And so the state of deep sleep is the presence of God within you. When you say, I'm dead to the world in deep sleep, yes, you are, but when you meditate, and through the science of yoga, the yoga of meditation, contact the holy vibration, the word of God, you're in the state of deep sleep. Now don't ever say that you are dead to the world in deep sleep. I mean that you will know nothing. Every time you meditate, as we meditated this morning, and you were conscious of only one thing, the great word of God, the holy vibration, with its cosmic sound and its light and its love, you were in the state of deep sleep. Now doesn't that encourage you? It does me. There's no reason why we shouldn't meditate and do our part to keep our life thoroughly balanced between this worldly consciousness and spiritual consciousness of the presence of God within us. This question is a good question for discussion this morning. Balance, happiness in balance. Because by that happiness, by that balance, we will have all the happiness we want. There's nothing that will give you the peace and happiness and joy as the conscious presence of God at will. When you can consciously, at will, think of it, tune in on God's presence within you and know it. There's nothing that will give you happiness and balance of life as that will. Now, these are not mythical statements. They're available and demonstratable to everybody, everyone in this room, every one of us, because we're made in the image of God, and that spiritual part of us is God's presence within us. And the physical part even is God's presence within us, slightly attached to this worldly living, with all its trouble and tribulation, as the scriptures say. Now, those who meditate also are not in balance. That is, meditate too much. I'm glad I didn't stop with just meditate. Meditate too much. And here I'm telling you that meditation is so essential. I mean, those who meditate too much are not in balance because it leads to what? Laziness. It leads to laziness. And there are certain countries in which, due to their climatic conditions and the habit of too much meditation, they develop that characteristic which is not a characteristic of balance. Both sides are necessary. Activity plus meditation. Both sides are necessary. Now, going on, balance is definitely corroborated by the two greatest commandments in the Bible. Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy strength and with all thy might and with all thy power. Means that supports meditation. Because you cannot love God with all your strength and power unless you meditate. Meditation means concentration on God. Unless you concentrate on the power of God within you as the holy vibration, you cannot follow this first commandment. And the second commandment, which is like unto it, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. In other words, you don't have much trouble working for yourself and for your interests, do you? Therefore, The second commandment means you shall see God in your neighbor, and loving him in that neighbor, you shall play your part in the drama of life without hesitancy, with great joy, and you will play it to please God. That's the only way to play this drama of life without being captured by the delusion which we find in it. And so what you do in carrying out the second commandment is to play your part in the cosmic dream to please God. That's the easiest way. And doing that, you are carrying out the second commandment of seeing and serving God in your neighbor. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets. Think of it. All the law. I don't care whether you're in business or teaching school or what you're doing. Carry out these two commandments, the first of which supports meditation, and the second of which supports activity, which is directed by the high viewpoint of which is given you as you meditate for oneness with God. That's the balance of life we must follow. Activity plus meditation, serving God in both aspects. That's balance. Balance between meditation and activity. And so a balance is necessary. And when you have that balance, you will be happy. If you don't want to be happy, keep out of balance till you're thoroughly convinced that you want to change and make that balance right. And so, to substantiate the few things which I have said, just a word or two from Master's writings, which I know you all enjoy, especially when they are worked into such a subject as this morning. From one of his books, the Master said, a prominent businessman visited the hermitage, and after he was introduced to the Master, he said, I am disgustingly healthy and disgustingly wealthy, he said. Well, Master, you know, is pretty clever himself. So he said to him, but are you disgustingly happy? So the man conceded the point, and it says here, he became a student. So there you have it. Now another reference in the same little book. There were a large group of people gathered in Encinitas on a picnic, such as was had there yesterday, which was such an enjoyable thing. And what was carried on then? Both aspects of living, that which pertains to the body and the enjoyment of simple good things, plus the spiritual communion which followed that. And so Master says here, he says, how much better this is than the time-wasting amusements of restless, worldly people, each of who is becoming rich in peace, each of you is becoming rich in peace and happiness. God wants his children to live simply and to be content with innocent pleasures. Because why? God is joy himself. God is bliss himself. We are his children, made in the image. How can we think he wants us to suffer? How can he think he wants us to be out of balance? No, he wants us to be perfect as he is, perfect in balance. Doesn't he work? He's created all these stars and universes and spiral nebulae and all those astronomical things without end. And yet he keeps on working because he's showing us the balance. If he didn't work, the whole place would dissolve back into him. And so as God sets the example, we must follow him as his true children. Now going on to another point, the East and the West must find balance. We have been talking about balance in human beings. Human beings make up the different countries and the different sections of our world and the different sections of all things. In the East, we find a tendency toward neglecting the body and progressive activity. If you read the history of the Eastern countries, you'll find that is so. Instead of doing that, they should spend more time in correcting sanitations and worldly conditions. There's no question about that. And we, in the West, we are quite expert in doing things and making things move. We have the know-how, and we have good conditions here. Best in the world, Master used to tell me, and he came from the eastern part. But we can put more effort in developing our spiritual side, can we not? In the East, especially in India, they are well advanced in the spiritual advancement of the soul. In here, we are well advanced in the material advancement. A balance, Master always said, is necessary between the material accomplishments of the West and the spiritual accomplishments of the East. Both are necessary. Both are necessary. He never said, give up all your advancements here. No, he said, it's wonderful. It's the best country in the world for these things. And he says, don't let anybody tell you it isn't. But he says, America, if she will just advance the spiritual side of her nature, she will become the super nation. He often said that, because we are thoroughly advanced on the material side, and we are also quite advanced on the spiritual side. And America is a spiritual nation. There's no question about it. It was founded on spiritual principles, and that's why it is a good place to live. And I'm sure, not only from my own conviction, but from the words of the Master, that you can find God right here in America. You can find him here, because the wisdom of the East has been brought here by great masters, including our own Master. Jesus said what? Seek first the kingdom of heaven, and all things shall be added unto you, showing that the spiritual side of our nature must be advanced. Master said it in a little different way. He said, balance is necessary. He said, in the daytime, work hard, carry on, do your duties, following out the second commandment. But he says, at night, go deep. Through your practices of Kriya Yoga and the meditations of self-realization fellowship, go deep in spirit, and you will find God, and you will surely be living in a balanced life. And so we must remember these things, that no nation has everything. It's good it's made that way. Different nations are adept in different things. The British are noted for their stick-to-itiveness and their law. And Germany is noted for its scientific advancement, and America, of course, is noted for its know-how. And the different nations you will find have a different aspect of God in them. And so all nations are necessary. A balance should be there in all nations between their material accomplishments and their spiritual attainment. Let us understand these things. Master has something to say about that, and the autobiography as follows. East and West must establish a golden middle path of activity and spirituality combined. India has much to learn from the West. Master was so reasonable. India has much to learn from the West. And in material development, in return, India can teach the universal methods by which the West will be able to base its religious beliefs on the unshakable foundations of yogic science. And so, just as Mr. Rosser pointed out, how, through following the path of self-realization, you can know this science of yoga, and by so knowing it and practicing it, you can attain personal contact with God. Having that, your life will surely be balanced, without question of a doubt. Now, above all, learn yoga. Learn yoga, which means union. And by so doing, you will be saved from the pitfall of attachment to dogmatic beliefs, which do not lead to personal contact with God. But underlying all outward form of religion, all outward forms is that underlying universal noumena, the presence of God, which everyone in any religion can find. All true religions, Gandhi said, behind the Vedas, behind Christianity, behind all true religions is that one underlying truth, which is universal. And all the students that I have met in the many years that I have been with the Master, I have found they've have all found the underlying universality of religion if they practice their yoga and self-realization fellowship meditation. This is true. This is not just my idea, but I know everyone who sincerely practices yoga or meditation, which means first getting into the presence of God, then uniting with Him. 2 steps are necessary. First, through the different techniques to get into the presence of God as the holy vibration with the light and the sound and the great love of God. That's His first manifestation. The great word, the holy vibration. The Amen, the Om of the Hindus. First, getting into that presence of God and then merging in Him. Then you will attain what? Personal demonstration of the fact that God is and exists and that He is knowable and that each one of us can have Him. Now, isn't that a wonderful thing? Do that and your life will surely be balanced. And so, meditation is very important. Meditation keeps out delusion. This is perhaps the greatest thing. Even if you did not wholly attain the presence of God, which I know you won't stop if you once get started, meditation keeps out the delusion, which is so engulfing in this existence, isn't it? You think of your worldly activities. How much can you surely count on? This world is not as it seems because of this forced delusion, this force of the cosmic dream known as Maya, which keeps us from knowing the underlying reality of God's presence. And so meditation, the greatest good that comes from meditation is that it keeps us out of delusion. And this delusion is very darkening, very engulfing. One lady was telling me a good definition of delusion, or a good instance to remember. Have you seen a fly land in molasses? Sure you have. Everybody's seen that. All right. You see, he pulls one foot up, and he gets that rid of the sticky molasses, and then he gets at the other one. And by that time, the front feet are down in, and he pulls out one foot and then the other. But that's delusion. That's a great illustration of delusion. The fly stuck in molasses. Think of yourself. Do you ever completely get up out of that molasses of delusion? It's very difficult, except you meditate. Delusion is very strong in all walks of life. In religion, somebody was telling me this funny little thing about delusion. And it really struck me quite funny, and I hope it does you. And this particular devotee said to me, he said, he says that baseball is spoken of in Genesis. I said, Genesis? Baseball? They didn't have baseball. Oh, yes, he says, it speaks of it in Genesis. I said, what, of course? He says, it says in Genesis, in the big inning, God created heaven and earth. So there you have delusion. Remember that little illustration, in the big inning. Now, yoga, I got thinking of that inning. Yoga will give you, the following of yoga will give you perfect balance of what? Body, the materialistic side of ourselves, and mind and soul. The spiritual side, so to speak. If you practice yoga, as Master says, all-round development of body, mind, and soul is necessary. Not all on the mental side, not all meditation, not all bodily development to the making of money, but a balance between those things is surely necessary. And so, as long as it's quite warm, we'll soon close now. This science of yoga has been brought to us from the greatest masters of the East. Those of you who have read the autobiography realize that Babaji, that age-old one of our masters, who was Krishna years ago, in times of the Gita, that Babaji gave the teaching to Sri Yukteswarji. And Sri Yukteswarji gave it to our master. And through that line of great ones, it has been carried on down until this present time. And because of that, we are very fortunate in having the science of yoga explained to us through this particular channel of self-realization in a definite, concrete way, where we are not sidetracked just by one aspect of yoga. But yoga in its fullness, or we might call it Raja Yoga, has been given to us through the fact that it has come down through these great ones, and our Master has left it available for us in simple techniques and meditation. And so we must avail ourselves of the opportunity. We must not fail to avail ourselves of this opportunity whereby we can live a balanced life and we can know the spiritual presence of God within. And having that, we will surely be happy. And knowing that we are one with God. I am not this body. Well, what am I? I am one with the infinite Father. Knowing that, we can play our part in life to the fullest extent, and in so doing, we will not be in turmoil all the time. We will not be in the midst of tribulations which we cannot overcome, but we will be in peace and bliss of God no matter what we are doing in this worldly existence. That's what you can attain from following yoga of self-realization, and that's the blessing which will be yours if you persist. And after you have practiced your Kriya Yoga, attain the presence of God, then, if you will fully surrender to Him, fully surrender to God, that's the greatest thing. That's devotion. People say, I do not feel devotion. What's the matter with me? They say, how can I love God? Well, I say, do you love your wife? Yes. How do you do it? Oh, I just do it. Do the same with God. This is a fact. And if you really have that devotion for God, you will find Him. It's because we don't do anything about it, that's all. If you have somebody you love and you don't do anything about it, you won't love them. But it's because you do something about it. You exercise your will, which is God's will. Then He comes. And none can come unto Him unless His grace is given out, goes out to that particular devotee. The great Larry Marsha said two things are necessary: the practice of Kriya Yoga plus the full surrender to God at the end of that. These are very important things. If God is the sole doer, and I know every one of us in this room will admit He is, if God is the sole doer, why don't we surrender to His will? We do not surrender to His will, and we're in hot water most of the time. This life is a mess. It's delusion. But the minute you can step out of it by the conscious exercise of your will into the peace and bliss of God, the delusion is no more. Master used to say, darkness like a dark bird flies away on the coming of God's light. And these are wonderful things. And so we must avail ourselves of this opportunity to know and practice and make the science of yoga our own and the meditations of self-realization fellowship. And by so doing, we will have a balance of life. And having that balance, we all will be happy. And I'll close with a Bible reference which points out the lesson this morning nicely, and which I hope that you will enjoy. From Isaiah, the 30th chapter, 20th and 21st verse. Most wonderful reference on this occasion. And though the Lord give you the bread of adversity and the water of affliction, yet shall not thy teachers be removed into a corner any more, but thine eyes shall see thy teachers. Though God gives us the bread of adversity and trouble and tribulation, if we turn our attention through the following of these teachers as our great masters who have given us the Kriya Yoga, we will see, as it says, thine eyes shall see thy teachers. Thy teachers are in the light of God. Thy teachers are not necessarily in books. They are in the realization of their presence in the omniscience of God's light at the Christ center. That is what this means. And finally, the 21st verse, and thine ears shall hear a word behind thee saying, this is the way, walk ye in it. When you turn to the right hand, and when you turn to the left. And this word which you hear, you do not hear it with these ears, you hear it to the intuition of your soul. And that word is the holy vibration, the great cosmic sound of Om, the great word spoken of in St. John. And because it is God himself, in that word is all the teaching and all the guidance and all the knowledge that you need, because the presence of God is in that word. Attain that presence of God through your yoga, through your loyalty to God by being with him as much as possible. Get into his presence, and when you are in his presence, realize alone you can do nothing. But if he comes into you, all things are possible. Knowing that, fully surrender to him.